Hi team, I've got my 9th edition rulebook here. I know there's a chunk of YouTubers out there, a chunk of videos which will come up today explaining everything about 9th edition to you, but I wanted to boil it down and make this video as short as I can, as concise as I can, telling you everything you need to know about 9th edition. Right, so honestly the goal is not to ramble. This is supposed to be the speed video, to boil it down to its component parts, because I know other people are going to be doing 2-3 hour videos out there, and I would want to know as quickly as possible. Starting off, you used to stick detachments together and add up your command points. Now you start with a set number of command points, and for every detachment that you add, it costs you command points. At 1,000 to 2,000 points, you get 12 of them. And at 1,000 to 2,000 points, you can have 3 detachments. If you're doing less points than that, then less command points, less detachments. More points than that, then more points, command points, and detachments. So the way it works is you start off with 12, and if you bring in a battalion, it costs you 3 command points. If you're warlords in the battalion, you get those command points back. So essentially, if you bring a patrol, a battalion, and brigade and put your warlord in them, you get your command points back for that. If you add a vanguard, spearhead, or outrider detachment, they'll cost you 3 command points, and you don't get your command points back, even if your warlord is in them. So, for example, a battalion detachment, your warlord's in a battalion with a spearhead, that'll cost you 3 command points. If you have a battalion detachment and a spearhead, and your warlord is in the spearhead detachment, that'll still cost you 3 command points. That'll cost you 6 command points, because you'll pay the 3 command points for the battalion, your warlord isn't in it, plus the 3 command points for the spearhead. So you pretty much want to stick your warlord in a patrol, battalion, or brigade detachments to get those command points back. You don't ever get them back for a vanguard, spearhead, or outrider. Supreme Command detachments have changed. You can only include 1 Supreme Command detachment in your army, and it can only include a Primarch, Demon Primarch, or Supreme Commander, basically a model. And that model in the Supreme Command detachment has to be your warlord. And if you bring a patrol, battalion, or brigade, you get your command points back. You get them refunded to you. If you don't bring a patrol, battalion, or brigade, again, you don't get them refunded to you. So the way it works is, you've got a battalion and you put your warlord in it, job done, you've still got 12 CPs. You bring a battalion and Guilliman, or a battalion and Mortarion, and you'll get they have to be your warlord, and you get your command points back for it. You can only bring 1. So that's the way the Supreme Command detachment works. They have to be your warlord. You bring one of the other types of detachments, you don't get refunded those CPs. There are no flyer wings now. Air superiority detachment, whatever it was called, that's gone. The only way to get flyers is through battalions or spearheads or vanguards and things like that. All the regular detachments, you can bring 2 of them. Super heavy costs 3 CP for 1 Lord of War. Fortification network costs 1 CP. And the super heavy detachment, Imperial Knight players out there, it's going to cost them 6 command points to bring an Imperial Knight detachment with the Titanic keyword. It costs you 3 command points if you bring a super heavy detachment and there's no Titanic units in there. So if you want to bring your little armigers, or you want to bring something else running around in a super heavy detachment, 3 CP. You bring in Imperial Knights, 6 CP. There's no way to refund the command points for that sort of thing. What does this mean? So if you bring a battalion and 2 spearheads, or battalion, and that's going to cost you 6 CP. If your warlord's in the battalion, if your warlord isn't in the battalion, it's going to cost you 9 CP. Long story short, this way round you start off with a lot more CP, and you lose CP depending on what detachments you bring. You can also spend those CP before the game begins, and sticking stuff in reserve. We'll get to that when we get to reserves. So there's lots of ways to spend it at the start. You also get 1 CP per turn in the command phase every turn. So in turn 1 you'll get, if you've got 12 CP at the start, in turn 1 you're going to start off with 13. And then in turn 2 you get another one, turn 3 you get another one, etc, etc. Now playing the game itself, before we get onto the rules, match play, the way it works is you determine the mission, then you lit your objectives on the table, and then you set up your scenery. So no more setting up objectives on the top of a tower here. If you were doing that, you were doing it wrong in match play. Anyway, you're supposed to put all your objectives on the table, then set up the scenery on the table. And then you determine your secondary objectives. So the way it works is you've set up your table, you've put your objectives down, you've brought your army along, then you determine secondary objectives. In match play, there are six strike force missions for 1,000 to 2,000 points in this book. And every strike force mission comes with secondary objectives, and you can earn no more than 14 victory points from secondary objectives. 15 points. You can't score no more than 15 points from secondary objectives. Now, it seems like a layer of complication, but I think that we're all going to get used to it very, very quickly. You're going to be playing different missions all the time, where you might need to do X, or you might need to do Y, or you might have to kill Z. But the secondary objectives that you pick, the 3 that you pick for your army at the start, are probably going to be the same secondary objectives most of the time. And then you're going to have in your head, as 9th edition continues and continues and continues and continues, 5 or 6 secondary objectives, and you always tend to pick 5 or 6 secondary objectives, that you always tend to pick 3 of those ones. You might have, your play style might be very aggressive, therefore you don't ever look at this particular secondary objective to stay back and shoot. There's one called Line Breaker, for example. Score 4 victory points at the end of your turn if 2 or more units from your army, excluding aircraft, are wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. So if you've got a very stand and shoot army, you're probably never picking that secondary objective. But if you run a very aggressive Space Wars army, then you're almost certainly picking Line Breaker, whoever you fight with, because you're always pushing forward. If you've got a aggressive Tyranids force, then you're almost certainly picking Line Breaker, because at the end of every single one of your turns, you're going to have 2 or more units wholly within your opponent's deployment zone. Maybe not every single one of the turns, but most of the turns. So it's a way of guaranteeing these points. And remember, you don't have to score the 15 points just from Line Breaker. You're going to have 2 others. You're going to have 3 secondary objectives, trying to get these max 15 points as the game continues. So I think it's going to be something, just like we build our army a certain way, when you're building the army a certain way with your army, you're going to be thinking of a certain number of secondary objectives, and it's going to become like bread and butter to us. That's what I suspect. So put the objectives down, you set up the terrain, you pick your secondary objectives, and then you determine the attacker and defender by rolling off. You roll off, and then the defender chooses their deployment zone. So you've set up the table, you know who the defender is, you know who the attacker is, and then you stick stuff in reserves. Hello, a quick edit. I was editing the video for this video and realized I completely butchered the rules for strategic reserves. I did tell them, but I didn't tell them very well. So I'm editing again, hence the change of t-shirts, shaved beard. Hopefully this won't pop up too often while I'm editing this video, but I wanted to get the reserve thing right, because there are essentially now 2 types of reserves. There's reserves and there's strategic reserves. There's stuff that you set up not on the battlefield. There's stuff that you set up in a teleportarium, stuff that you summon in, stuff that says on its data sheets, units have rules on their data sheets that allow units to not be deployed on the battlefield. Those do not count as part of the strategic reserve rules. It says it very clearly. So your Tau battle suits, for example, don't have to go in strategic reserves, and you won't pay any points for putting them in strategic reserves. Terminators don't count as in strategic reserves. You don't have to pay any points for putting them in reserves. You can still only reserve less than half of the total points value of your army. So if you're bringing a 2,000 point army, you can reserve 999 points or less, either in normal reserves because their data sheet allows it, or strategic reserves. How much can you put in strategic reserves? Well, you can put as much as you want to in strategic reserves, so long as it's less than half of the total points value of your army. It costs you CP. The more you put in reserves, the more CP it costs you. And you can select whatever you want. You can pick a rhino with some troops and stick that in reserves. You can pick a warlord titan, stick that in reserves. An imperial knight you can put in reserves. And then power level. They use power level to determine how many command points it costs. So 1 to 9 power will cost you a CP. 10 to 19 power, 2 CP. 20 to 29 power, 3 CP, etc., etc. You add up the total amount of power that you have in strategic reserves, not in normal reserves, and it will cost you that number of CP. So, for example, you could be a Tau player and you're going to put that unit of crisis suits, which can drop in, and that unit of crisis suits in normal reserves because that's what it allows them to do on their data sheet. That doesn't cost you any CP. But you're going to put the 2 units of fire warriors and their devilfish also in strategic reserves. You add up the total number of power of those 4 units, and that'll tell you how many CP it'll cost to stick them in strategic reserves. And it'll be about 2 CP. When can you bring stuff in from reserves and stick it on the battlefield? Well, in match play it's turns 2 and 3. That's it. That's a normal rule. Turn 2 and 3, stuff drops in, unless there's a rule that says it can otherwise on its data sheet, for example, drop pods. In open play and narrative play, strategic reserves can only come in turn 2, 3, 4, 5. You can't bring in strategic reserves in turn 1. You can't bring your devilfish rushing onto the table in turn 1. Strategic reserves in all gameplay modes come in turn 2 onwards, and in match play they've got to be in by turn 3. Stuff that allows you to stick stuff in reserves normally because there's a rule on the data sheet that says it can come in. That can be stuck on the can be stuck in reserves in open or narrative play can now come in turn 1 because they're not in strategic reserves. Seems a little bit complicated, but it's not really. Basically, if there's a rule on a data sheet for stuff like this, you follow the rules on the data sheet, and in match play they've got to come on in turn 2 or turn 3, and you can stick them anywhere on the battle grid when they come in. If you're sticking stuff in strategic reserves and you paid CP for it, then you follow the strategic reserves rules, and they've got to come on determined by the strategic reserves rules. Now, when stuff arrives from normal reserves, not strategic reserves, your terminators, you can follow the rules for that unit on the data sheet. You can put them within the opponent's deployment zone. You can put them close to the opponent's board edge. When you're bringing stuff in from strategic reserves in battle round 2 or 3, you can never put them within 6 inches of your opponent's battlefield edge. And in turn 2, you can't put them in the deployment zone. So Terminators in turn 2 can deep strike in the opponent's deployment zone, right close to the opponent's table edge if it wants to, and do whatever they want to do. Demons can do it too, whatever can deep strike him. Stuff coming in on rhinos, they can always come in on whatever table edge you want, so long as it's not the opponent's table edge. In turn 2, they can't end up in the opponent's deployment zone. In turn 3, they can, but never within 6 inches of the enemy's battlefield edge. When they come in, strategic reserves follow the normal rules. They can't be set up within 9 inches of enemy models. They count as moved. When you move them in, they have to be wholly within 6 inches of a table edge, not the opponent's edge. So they're not, even if you're coming in with some really fast stuff that normally, like bikes that can turbo boost, that normally go 20, they're not going 20 inches in, they're going wholly within 6 inches of a battlefield edge. And they tidy up the rules a little bit here as well. If it is your table edge, you can bring them within 9 inches of an enemy unit. They've got to be set up within, not wholly within, but within 1 inch of their own battlefield edge and wholly within their deployment zone, in which case they can be set up within 9 inches and even within engagement range of enemy models. So if there are enemy models in turn 2 or turn 3 in your deployment zone, you can bring something in from reserve within 1 inch of your edge and then shoot them, and then you can charge them. They might only be 5 inches away. Remember, in turn 4 or turn 5, there's nothing coming in from your edge then. So, but it does mean that your opponent will probably be thinking twice, or you'll be thinking twice about having models right along their edge or your edge in turn 2 or turn 3 if they have stuff in strategic reserves. Aircraft that fly off the table count as going in strategic reserves and then can bank around and come back on, and you can place them wherever you want to when they come back in from strategic reserves. They follow all the normal rules for models arriving from strategic reserves. So in turn 2, you can't place them in your opponent's deployment zone. And in turn 2 and 3, you can't place them within 6s of your opponent's table edge. So that's reserves. At this point, I want to point out all these little bullet points they put all the way through the book. They're really, they're good. It's nice. It helps tidy things up a bit. So you've set up the table, the terrain, you know what mission you're playing, you know what your secondary objectives are. You know what's in reserve, and then you start deploying armies, and the defender who picked their deployment zone deploys first. And they deploy, you deploy, they deploy, you deploy, one unit after another, and all the match play missions follow this setup. There's no exceptions to this. And then you roll off to see who goes first. There is no seizing the initiative. So the roll off to determine defender or attacker doesn't determine who goes first. The roll-off to determine defender-attacker means the defender picks their deployment zone and drops their first unit down. And then you go, I go, you go, I go. And then after all that's done, we roll off again. The winner of that roll-off can choose whether they go first, no seizing. I like this because it means that those occasions where someone knows that they're attacking and they've been hyper aggressive and your opponent does some weird counter deployment and then you seize the initiative and your plan goes all out the window, it means that those sort of weird scenarios, which sometimes happens, will not happen in 9th edition. It also means that regardless of whoever's defending or attacking, you're going to have to be a bit cagey about who you drop, because whoever goes first is just determined by a sheer roll-off. It's just determined by chance. You don't know. You will have no idea when you put in. It's fate. It's down to cinch who goes first. Then the games always end in turn 5. So the main changes, summing all that stuff up, the main changes in 9th edition are: you're going to be having secondary, that's weird English, isn't it? Secondary objectives, you're going to be able to play stuff in reserves, there's no seizing, and it's 5 turns. This formula is the same regardless of the mission that you're playing. It's the same for narrative as well. That's what you do. That's how you play 9th edition. You set out this way, you bring your army, you roll off to see who goes first, 5 turns. It's going to be the same. It's nice, it's simple, I like it. Then we're going to go on to the main rules themselves. What has changed, what has been updated, and essentially 9th edition is 8th edition tidied up. Some of the funny little things have gone. Some of the things that we've been asking for: can't vehicles shoot into close combat? Can't my flyers go off the table? Yes, they can now. So it's like a new improved 8th edition, to be honest. The rules are a lot bigger than 8th edition. 8th edition had that pamphlet, which is probably why the facts are huge. So many facts tidying it up. It needed some clarification. This one, the rules are much bigger, but that's because they're trying to be as clear as they can. And one of the ways they're trying to be as clear as they can is put bullet points after every paragraph of rules, so you can see exactly what they meant by X or Y. It makes it easier to read. And talking about trying to make it as clear as they can, at the back of the book, they've even got this rare rules section, 4 pages, and it's basically like a FAQ that they've printed inside the main rule book. And in here it says, for example, if you've got a question, what does it mean when I can fight again? It tells you what it means. What does it mean when I'm resurrecting a model that was knocked down? What can it do? It tells you what it can do. So they're trying to be as clear as they can with the new rule set. So it's 8th edition tidied up with a bit of zing, with a bit of difference to it. And it's the little bits. It's not so much the big bits. The big changes we're going to get used to really quickly. It's the little changes that are going to trip us up, particularly people who make battle reports. So right off the top of the bat, there is a new phase called the command phase. And in the command phase, you get ACP if you have a battle forged army. In 8th edition, I can't remember one fight or one person who didn't run a battle forged army, and a battle forged army is an army where everything belongs to a faction. We do that anyway, right? I think everyone does that. No one runs unbound. So you, unless you're playing open play and you're very, very new to the game. So you're going to get a CP at the start of every turn. This will be in addition to the maximum 1 CP that you can regain if you're command point farming. So if you're command point farming, you'll get 1 in your command phase, and you'll get 1 for command point farming. What else happens in the command phase? Well, at the moment, not a lot. There might be some specific things that happen in the command phase depending on a mission. But it's clear that the command phase is the phase where your chaplain will give out his litany, or it is the phase where you say, "My will be done," and put it on a unit over there. Those things in our codexes that currently say at the start of the turn do X or Y, those are the things that we'll be doing in the command phase when the new codexes come out throughout the launch of 9th edition. The reason why I know this is because in this book, which has got the new miniatures from the box set in it, the chaplain does his litany in the command phase, and the overlord selects his thing, "My will be done," in the command phase. So we have a command phase. That tidies that up. What does it mean in your turn? It means in the command phase, and I'm sure the FAQ will come out and say that straight away. Then we move on to the movement phase. The movement phase is unchanged except for a couple of things. Units can make a normal move, they can make an advanced move, they can remain stationary or fall back. But a couple of things to change. There's something called an engagement range now, which is within 1 inch of an enemy horizontally and 5 inches vertically. You can't move within engagement range. If you're within engagement range of someone, you can only get there when you charge, or if you're a flyer, if you're an aircraft. Models can move over the base of aircrafts but can't end their move within engagement range, and the same for flyers. That was fact in 8th edition. That's still here. So you can't move within an engagement range. You can't move within 1 inch, but also you can't move within 5 inches, 1 inch and 5 inches. If you are in engagement range. That's one of the things to note. The other thing to note is falling back. Everyone can fall back as normal. If you fall back, you can't shoot or manifest psychic powers now. So if a tank falls back, they can shoot into combat, but if a tank falls back, they can't shoot. Nothing can shoot when it falls back, unless it's Titanic. Things with the fly keyword that fall back can't shoot. That little one sentence in this book that says if you have the fly keyword, you can do that, isn't in here, and I've scoured it and scoured it and scoured it. The bit about stuff with the fly keyword says it can ignore enemy models that it moves over when they advance or fall back, and they can ignore vertical distances, models with the fly keyword. So something can be 5 meters high, but it only technically moves 3 inches that way, and they can ignore vertical distances and other models. That's the only thing that things with the fly keyword can do. Stuff that falls back can't shoot unless it's Titanic. Can't charge, can't manifest psychic powers. If you fall back, you can't do anything. Units that have the ability to fall back in this game and still shoot or charge will be very powerful. This is a very good buff for Ultramarines. This is a buff for Harlequins. There is a new model in this thing, the new Necron dude. The Royal Warden adaptive strategy. In your command phase, you can select 1 friendly dynasty unit within 9 inches of this model. Till the end of that turn, that unit can fall back and still be selected to shoot and charge. Anything that has the ability to fall back and shoot and charge has got more powerful. Anything that could previously fall back and shoot, such as Tau, Suits, Eldar, Skimmers, things like that, have just suddenly hit a nerf. But it's also a boon for assault-based armies, for those orc armies, for those Tyranid armies, for the Eternal Slaughter, for stuff that is just charging across and hitting things that was previously falling back and shooting them. They're not doing that anymore. So you move normally, or you advance, or you remain stationary, or you fall back. A note on unit coherency as well. If you've got 6+ models in the squad, they have to be within 2 inches of 2 models from that squad. So if you've got 5 models, you can still string them out like this within 2 inches of each other. But if you've got 6 or more, you can't do that because these models at the end aren't within coherency of 2 or more models from that squad. You would have to do that. to make sure that the ones at the end are within coherency. It feels like this is going to stop really long daisy chains like this, but it doesn't really, only a little bit. However, another thing that will stop really long daisy chains is unit coherency checks. In 8th edition, it was perfectly acceptable to charge like this with the priests creating another daisy chain. And you can do this in 9th as well. You can have your priests in a nice long daisy chain like this, tagging both of the walkers. In 8th edition, if it looked like this after the morale phase, then it looked like this after the morale phase. I've taken away the guys that lost in combat or lost morale. I've taken away from the middle. That's the end of my turn with these two priests. I've still tagged these two walkers. I'm good. Everything's good. In the opponent's phase, they have to fall back and those units can't shoot. They don't have the Titanic keyword. They can't shoot. They can't charge. They can't do anything. I've tagged them both. Great. But in 9th edition, another thing that's in here to stop daisy chains is the unit coherency check. Remove models from units in your army that are not in unit coherency. So as part of the morale phase, after I've done all the morale, I have to select a model which is no longer in unit coherency. It could be that one, it could be that one. Even if I have a lot of models and they were originally both from the same unit and I have passed morale, even if I have passed my morale test, if they're no longer in unit coherency, I must continue to pull one model away until that unit can be considered to be in unit coherency. No more daisy chaining. This is another quick edit. Combat attrition gives us another example of why daisy chaining will get hit. So at the moment we're all in coherency here. Now my opponent is shooting at that thing. If I take any one of these models away, so I take that one away, I'm no longer in coherency. He's no longer within 2 inches of 2 other models. So as soon as I lose one model from this squad, the rest get hit. He'll have to keep going until I get back into coherency. So less than 6+ models. Due to the unit coherency checks, the best way to protect a unit like this would be to run them like that. It doesn't matter where I'm pulling models from. That would hurt, actually. So it does matter. Pull them from the edge. Transports. Embarking, disembarking is the same. However, when you disembark from a transport, you have to be wholly within 3 inches now, not just within 3 inches. So getting out transports is going to be a lot tighter. There's no changes to the rules around explosions. There's no changes to the rules around aircraft. They just explain them a little bit better in the main rules here. But essentially, it's the same thing that's been fact all those years ago or months ago or whenever it was. So no real changes there. Psychic phase, there's a couple of subtle changes in the psychic phase. The first one is a psyker you can only attempt to manifest one psychic power each battle round with the exception of smite. Now that's the same for match play and it's the same now, but that was only a match play rule. Now that rule will carry over into open play and narrative play as well. Basically you can do as many smites as you want, but only one of a particular power. Match play players know this rule. They've got it down. And smite goes 5, 6, 7, 8, unless you're a Grey Knight or unless there's a rule that allows you to ignore that rule. So no real changes there from a match play point of view. The only big change for psychers is the one thing I mentioned earlier. If they fall back, they can't cast a psychic power. And also, when you select a unit to perform psychic powers in the psychic phase, you select that unit, it does all of its psychic powers. Then you select the second unit, it does all of its psychic powers. Then you select the third unit, then it does all of its psychic powers. A lot of Eldar players out there, and Tyranids, I've done it as well, have done that psychic power from that dude, then that psychic power from that dude, then gone back to that dude and done his psychic powers. Dude, they're bugs. But you can bounce around. There wasn't anything telling you that you couldn't bounce around psychers. Now there is. You select a psyker, you do all of its powers. You select another psyker, you do all of its powers. I think that's probably in there to stop that gamey element a bit more. Tidying up of the rules again. I can't see it affecting gameplay very much, but it might a little bit. Okay, shooting phase. The shooting phase is essentially the same. You can't shoot if you're in engagement range unless you have a pistol. There is a slight tweak here as well, though. Just like in the psychic phase where You do that guy and do all of its things. It's the same in the shooting phase. If you've got a unit, the unit selects all of its guns and all of its different targets. I've got this unit and it can shoot that target over there and that target over there and that target. You do all of the same gun first. So I'll fire all my Hurricane Bolters from my Land Raider Crusader. Then I'll fire, I won't fire half of them and then the Assault Cannon and then the other half. You fire all of one gun type, and then you move on to the next gun type in your unit and you fire all of that gun type, and then you move on to the third gun type of your unit and you fire all of that type. Again, it's to stop gamemanship, where someone was plinking away a little bit and plinking away a little bit and seeing if they could kill that tank with their small arms. I'll fire 3 at that, and then I'll see, and then I'll fire another 3 at that. No, none of that. You select all your targets all at the same time and you fire all of one particular gun type at the same time in the shooting phase. And you have assault, heavy, rapid fire, grenade and pistol. They are the same. Here's the one big change though. When an infantry model shoots a heavy weapon, subtract 1 from the hit roll when resolving that weapon's attacks. If the firing model has moved for any reason this turn, e.g. it made a normal move this turn. Only infantry. So if you've got a heavy weapon and you're a dreadnought, or you're a biker, or you're a flyer, or you're a whatever, so long as you don't have the infantry keyword, you can fire heavy weapons without that -1 to hit penalty now. So really good for almost all the vehicles out there. Bad for Terminators with the Cyclone missile launcher on his head, or Devastators moving around, unless you've got a rule that overrules it. But yeah, the heavy penalty only affects infantry. Woohoo! That's the range weapons types. Big guns never tire is the vehicle ability. Monsters and vehicles can now shoot at units within engagement range of them. But they can only target the unit within engagement range of them. They can't fire out. If they fall back, they're not shooting, they're not charging, they're not doing anything because they have chosen to fall back, unless there's a rule that allows them to shoot when they fall back, such as their Ultramarines or their Harlequins or something else. So a vehicle engaged in close combat can shoot at the unit that they're engaged with in close combat. Unless the guns they're using are blast weapons. You can't fire blast weapon types. When it says rapid fire heavy, if it's got blast in its rule, you can't fire at a point blank range. You can fire beyond the unit that you're engaged with, but will only be able to make attacks with that weapon if all enemy units within engagement range of the firing model's unit have been destroyed first. So if you're locked up with a vehicle and there's only 2 or 3 models there, and let's go back to a Land Raider Crusader with Hurricane Bolters, Assault Cannons, Multi-Melter. Let's say you fire all 24 shots. You select your targets at the same time. So you say, okay, I've only got 2 models engaged with my Land Raider Crusader. I'll fire my 24 Hurricane Bolters at them, and then I'll select my Assault Cannon over there and my Multi-Melter over there. You fire your Hurricane Bolters first. If it kills those 2 dudes, then you can fire, because you're no longer engaged in engagement range. You've killed everything in engagement range, you can fire out. If I don't kill those 2 dudes, then the shots from my Assault Cannon and my Multi-Melter are lost. If you're firing heavy weapons in engagement range as well, -1. So vehicles and monsters can shoot in close combat. They can't shoot blast weapons in close combat. And if those guns are heavy, it's -1 to hit in close combat. Blast weapons, weapons with a blast rule, such as grenades, you still roll a dice, D6 or 2D3 or 2D6, whatever the blast version of that is. But if you're shooting at a unit with 6 or more models, then it's a minimum 3. So if you're rolling that D6 and you roll a 1, that'll be a minimum 3. So it'll be a 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 6 or more models. 11 or more models, maximum number of attacks with that weapon. So you roll your D6 and then it will do 6. Or if it's a D3, you're going to do 3. That's blast weapons. The last new rule is Look Out Sir, and it's about targeting characters. It's the character targeting one. It's been tweaked a little bit. It's been leaked online. I'll just go over it here very quickly because it has been leaked online. So characters 10 or wounds or more, you can shoot the crap out of them, no problem. Characters 9 or less wounds, if it's the closest guy in line of sight, you can shoot it. If it's been blocked by another character, you can shoot it, so long as you can see it. but you can't target characters if they're within 3 inches of a friendly vehicle or monster or another unit that has 3 or more models, unless it's the closest unit in line of sight and range. But what this does mean is weird things like this can potentially happen. I can't shoot at the Space Wizard if I'm firing from this point of view because he's not the closest thing in line of sight and range, and he's within 3 inches of a friendly unit with 3 or more models. What I could do is blow these guys away first in my shooting phase, and now the Space Wizard is no longer within 3 inches, and I'm firing from this point of view. I can now target that character. Basically, there's more conditions you have to fulfill to ensure that your dude doesn't get shot. At the start of 8th edition, where it was like, is he the closest? Yes. And then I can shoot him. But then the character thing came in, and now this has come in. And I just had some food, actually. She just called me. Look at this. Look, I just noticed. It's really hot. English summertime. Right. Actually hitting something. Hitting, wounding, etc., etc. The hit and the wound roll is the same. However, rolling to hit, unmodified hit roll of 1 always fails. And an unmodified wound roll of 1 always fails. Unmodified hit roll of 6 or wound roll of 6 always passes. Nice and simple, but here's the kicker. A hit roll can never be modified by more than -1 or +1. That means if, after all the cumulative modifiers to hit have been calculated, the total modifier would be -2 or worse, it's changed to -1. And a wound roll can never be modified by more than -1 or +1. That's a good one. We like that one. No more shenanigans when it's minus gazillion to hit something in the backfield and I can't actually physically hit it. Hit and wound rolls, plus or -1 only. Saving throw, an unmodified wound roll of 1 always fails. However, unmodified wound rolls of 6s for saving throws don't automatically pass. Because that would be silly, right? You're shooting at something with Hell Blasters, AP -4. It's really raining. And burning through the armor, and the apprentice says, well, I'll roll some dice anyway because I might get some 6s for the saves. No, you have to remember that the unmodified hit or wound of 6s always passes, but not save. And then unmodified hit, wound, and saves of 1 always fail. Charging, you have to engage with every unit that you declare to charge against. If you don't manage to get within engagement range of every unit you declare to charge against, you fail. So in 8th, I could declare a charge against both units, and if I fail to get the 9-inch charge over there, but still roll a 5, I can go into the Plague Marines. Now, if I fail that 9-inch charge, if I only roll a 5 and I declared both of them, I can, because I can't engage both of the units I declared my charge against, that charge fails. The Terminators stay there. You have to hit both. Which feels like it kind of sucks for assaulting armies, but then remember this, engagement range is 1 inch and 5 inches. So for these guys to actually engage those Plague Marines beforehand, all the question, can I actually fight them? Do I need to get all the way around here and get up there? And then that's 7 inches across plus 3 inches up. That's a 10-inch charge. That's an impossible charge. Well, now it's a 4-inch charge. I'm in engagement range. I'm within an inch and 5 inches. This was an impossible charge as well. Now they're within engagement range, 1 inch and 5 inches. Then in the fight phase, who can fight? Well, anyone in engagement range can fight. They're within an inch of an enemy unit. But anyone who isn't engagement range can only fight if they're within ½ inch of someone who's also within ½ inch of the enemy. So in this case, these guys couldn't fight here. They actually couldn't fight there because the front rank are not within ½ inch. For the second rank to fight now, instead of within an inch of within an inch, you have to be within ½ inch of with someone who is in ½ inch. This means the fights are going to be a lot denser, and this means that the third rank, which could sometimes fight, are gone. It means these are messy occasions where you don't really know whether these two guys can fight or not, and you get the tape measure out and have a good can they fight? I think they can fight. I think this one's in, but this one's not in. They're gone. It's only going to be the front rank and the guys within ½ inch of someone who's in ½ inch. These two in 9th edition definitely won't be able to fight. And that one as well. Just remember, the front rank only need to be within an inch, but if you want Other ranks to fight ½ inch and ½ inch. Hello, just needed to do another quick edit. The order of fighting has changed a bit. Charging units fight first, and then after all the charging units are first fought, the defending player selects one of their units first. So previously, if it was my turn, I would charge all my stuff across the table, I would do all my charging units, and then I would select one of my units that's already in engagement range and fight with that unit first that didn't charge this turn. Now it's the other way around. I do all my charging units, and then my opponent selects one of his units first after all the charging units are fought. A little bit of a change there. It seems fair because I've just had a whole turn where I've blasted away and then charged and my opponent's just had to take it. But there'll be those weird occasions sometimes when there's been no charging units and we get to the fight phase, and at the start of the fight phase, my opponent will get to fight first. This is interesting also when your Smash Captain goes charging in your turn. Say my Smash Captain goes charging in my turn, charging units go first, I select him, and he doesn't kill the tank that he's hit or the monster that he's hit, and he's locked up in combat. Then we're going to go on to my opponent's turn, and he'll get to shoot me and charge me and do all of his stuff. And then at the start of the fight phase, I can select my Smash Captain again to smack that tank one more time, or slack that hero one more time, or that he will get to complete his... If you've got a really snowbally unit, a Wrecking Ball unit, a Miley Cyrus unit smashing in there that fails to kill something in your charge phase, then you might be able to select that unit first. If it survives the fight back in that phase, you might be able to select that unit first in your opponent's phase to finish the job. Which it's interesting. It'll change the dynamic a little bit. Heroic interventions are the same, and interactions with aircraft in the fight phase are the same as they were after they fact everything, just as everything with moving with aircraft in here is the same after they fact everything. I just remembered Overwatch. that was a big change. There's no Overwatch now unless you pay a CP to Overwatch with a unit, or unless you TOW and they can Overwatch for free. So any unit now in 40k that has the ability to Overwatch, it's going to be quite pokey. The Overwatch strat, universal strat, is only 1 CP. But honestly, how many times did Overwatch actually affect the game? What Overwatch did was slow the game down, and very rarely a glorious thing happened. It's sad to me though, because I live for those glorious moments. I really liked it when my charging Carnifex on 6 wounds left takes an Overwatch shot from Liam's captain, Liam's Chaos Lord, and it hits, and he needs a 3 to wound, and he wounded it, and then he needed a 6 to kill it, and he killed it. It's like, whoa, your Chaos Lord stood there with his combi melter and actually killed that Carnifex before he came, and his Chaos Lord only had 1 wound left. Those glory moments will be gone unless you pay the CP for them. But they were few and far between, weren't they? They were very few and far between, and no one's really going to be paying CP to do Overwatch now unless you've got a whole unit of Flamestorm aggressors and they're getting charged out by 28 berserkers or something like that. So Overwatch has gone. The rules for Overwatch are not gone, it's a CP unless you tell. The rules for Overwatch are the same. That's a big change. It's the little things that trip me up. The bigger things, everyone's going to get down really cool. Consolidation, the same. The morale test, the morale phase has changed. We already talked about unit coherency checks happen in the morale phase as well. But the morale test, you roll a d6 and add the number of models that were destroyed this turn. A modified roll of 1 is always a success. So TOW players out there are rejoicing at this because 6s always pass with their bonding knives. 1s will always succeed. You could lose 9 out of 10 models in a squad, and if you roll a 1, no model flees. I think it was something bravery in previous editions, in 6th editions or something. I forget what the rule was, but 1s used to always pass in previous editions as well. So yeah, the Tau are going to succeed their morale tests, are going to be fearless a third of the time, because 1s and 6s, they'll just pass. Yeah, if it exceeds your leadership, whatever it is, you roll a dice, you add the number of models destroyed, compare it to your leadership. If it exceeds your leadership, a model flees. And then you make a new test, a combat attrition test. Roll a d6 for all the remaining models, and on a 1, they flee as well. So this seems to be a way, I mean, heroic last stand, staying there on a 1 no matter what, that's a good thing. But the combat attrition, anyway, this is what it is. 1 model flees if you fail, and then the chance of other models fleeing as well. That's how the morale phase works. And that's it for the rules. Those are the changes. Those are the things that have changed. So the big things that we're going to notice straight away are the fact that there's no overwatch, flyers can go off the table, reserves can come in, and that units with the fly keyword can no longer fall back and shoot. These are the big things that we're going to know. No overwatch, did I mention that? These are the big things that we're going to notice, but it's the little things. Unit coherency is going to, particularly when it comes to the morale phase, the unit coherency check and making sure, and in the movement phase, not daisy chain, that's going to come into effect. That's going to change 40k a little bit. And the engagement range idea, the fact that dreadnoughts can now smack things that are up on a higher floor, the fact that an Imperial Knight can now smack things up on a higher floor, the fact that charging models don't need to get all the way there, plus up the level, they can just be 1 inch and 5 inches. That unit engagement range is going to change things more. Yes, tanks can shoot into close combat, as long as they don't have blast weapons, but you'll just saturate them with more stuff. There's a couple of other there's a couple of other changes in there that I want to talk about in a separate video, because this one's rambled on for too long. I think I need to do a separate video just on the terrain. Terrain is optional, and most of it makes sense, and most of it is doing what we were doing anyway. I don't think terrain is going to change in any big way, shape or form, but there's some interesting ideas in there. So we'll talk about terrain in a separate video. This is what terrain does, and I want to break it down like this so you can sit in your car at lunch break and just watch a 10-minute video on it. The universal stratagems, there's 7 of them, and there's been a few tweaks to command point and reroll, for example. I want to talk about that in a separate video. So I think I'll wrap this up here, because I wanted to keep this as short and sharp as I can. This is the changes to 8th edition. Boom, this is how you play the game, this is the rules, etc, etc. Does that make sense? That makes sense. I think it makes sense. Overall, it gets 2 thumbs up from me. It's a better version of 8th edition, and I thought 8th edition was the easiest and best edition so far. Yes, there are still some hull facing, there's still some things that you can do, and you can make the rules as complex and as realistic as you want them to. But I don't necessarily want a rule system that is as complex as it can be. Definitely don't want that. And I definitely don't want a rule system that's as realistic as it can be as well. I mean, I love Titans. I really, really enjoy playing with my Titan. Some of the best books out there have Titan battles in it. But the rules for Adeptus Titanicus, for example, they're very good, they're very realistic, and they're a little bit clunky. I want them to 8th edition Adeptus Titanicus and trim that down a little bit. So I don't necessarily want, I know in myself now that perhaps when I was younger, I wanted the rules as complex as they possibly can be and as narratively focused as they can be. Now I just want a clean, smooth game system. And I think this is a cleaner, smoother game system than 8th edition. I like the fact as well that there isn't a difference in the game between match play and narrative play. There's some extra things that you'll be able to do in narrative, but that's the core rules themselves are the same. It's just the match play restrictions on reserves are X and Y. It's the same rule system, whatever game you're playing, whether it's open, narrative or matched. And it's quite easy to digest. It's laid out quite well. It's quite easy to digest. They've clearly gone into some care with this edition. So yeah, looking forward to making battle reports with it very soon. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe to deploymentzone.tv. There's a Patreon link below, all that sort of stuff. Thank you to Games Workshop for sending it through. I'm going to go now online and check out some YouTube videos that other YouTubers have made. Happy wargaming.